Well, a second day of green for the Nifty, and in fact, all the cap curve indices were in the green today, but I would still call it a flat market today. Nifty up 8 basis points, mid cap up 10 basis points, micro cap up 25 basis points, and only the small cap is up almost 70 basis points. If you look at the advanced decline ratio, it's more or less flattish, 1530 up, 1470 down. FIS, another day of small selling, another 500 crores of selling. DIs were positive bias to extent of 2,000 crores, but less than the 3,500 crores of yesterday. And no sector was more than plus 1% or more, less than minus 1%, all trading within a narrow range. So it was a very, as I said, repeat again, flattish market. So today I'm going to focus more in terms of the news flow and the macro indicators, which will give a hint for next week, but I thought it will be good to summarize because there are a lot of news, some positive, some negative. So what are the news? Well, first of all, Brent crude remained elevated around the 94 levels, 93.6 or 7, right? Because the US has moved from a military war to now looking at an economic war and blockade. And there is some evidence that, Chinese supplies from Iran are hurting because of this. So it again brought in the Brent to be very, very high. The second is, remember, we talked about the bond yields. Well, the Treasury had bought long-ended bond yields to try and bring them down. So one day the effect was that it came from 5.31, the 30-year yield, to 5.19. But the market discounted the action and said, no, US fiscal deficit is too high, US borrowing at 40 trillion is too high. And again, the 30-year yield went up to 5.3, 5.25. And the 10-year yield also went up from 4.64 to 4.7. So it was a very ephemeral. But that treasury buying had led to a trigger in terms of a weaker dollar, as well as the fact that the gold and silver both rose fairly fast. I think both were more than 1.5% up. So overall, a very mixed figure there, with the US desperately trying to control the yields by buying, but the market actually not believing that it's really going to sustain. So that was on the international front. What about the domestic front? Well, domestic front, the RBI minutes got released. Now, the release of the RBI minutes shows it was more of an hawkish kind of a policy, because while all there was a unanimous to maintain the repo rate and neutral stance, a few of the members said that based on the crude prices and food inflation, there could be a chance for rate hikes in the coming part of the year. Partly this is also due to the fact that already their projection for inflation was 5.9 for the third quarter, but also the fact that the growth that they've upped means that there's less worry about growth getting affected by a rate hike. So this was a slightly spooked the market also today in terms of that. In terms of the some part of the like auto and FMCG and all being negative, but I wouldn't really attribute it too much to that. But at the same time, the monsoon number, right, is came in positive. So while RBI says inflation is to be watched out for, the sowing, the monsoon outlook is that up to now the monsoon is about 87-88% as per IMD. SkyMet had projected it at 85, but IMD is still expecting that August, September it will step up to 90-92, and overall the whole full monsoon will also be at 90-92. So they are not as bearish as SkyMet in their forecast. The second aspect of the monsoon is the Kharif sowing, and the good news there is the good rains in July have actually now led to about 1,030 crores plus of hectares of sowing, which lakh hectares of sowing, which is better than last year. So actually crop sowing is better than last year, and most of the crops have been equal or better than last year, except for cotton, which is slightly under. Otherwise all the other crops have been, but this sowing is good. But one caution here is in terms of the fact that the moisture content in the soil based on subsequent rains will decide the actual yields. So while the acreage sown is good enough, will each hectare give you the same amount of crop as last year? That will still depend on the moisture in the soil, which is the second part of the monsoon has to deliver. But some good news is that in some parts of the reservoirs are fairly full, which augurs well not only for the rest of the sowing season, but also augurs slightly well for the Rabi crop, which sowing will start after this Kharif season. So overall, a mixed bag in terms of the monsoon, and that's where the whole food inflation piling into the RBI's thought process comes through. The other domestic news which I wanted to focus on was the fact that the forex reserves have shot up by another almost 9.910 billion to reach about 720 odd billion, which is not very far from the, I think 717 billion is the correct number, not far from the peak in February of 728 billion. This is of course partly due to the very good success of the FCNRB scheme, which RBI has raised about 56 billion FCNR plus ECB, but the governor said that he expects to get 80 billion even with an early closure of 31st August. So with those inflows, I think that's a very good sign for the import coverage and all of that. So that's a good news. The other good mixed news I would say is that the HSBC calculates the PMI, and overall PMI came in at about 54 odd, slightly less than last month, but it is the 64th month consecutive of PMI being above 50, which is expansion mode. Of course, manufacturing is slowed down slightly, and it's the services growth which has compensated for that. So overall, if you see, I would say monsoon is a tick in terms of the initial expectation of El Nino and a very sharp shortfall. Sowing also has been okay. RBI policy is a little bit of a worry because they seem to be edging towards a rate hike. And anything else in terms of the news I missed? Just give me a minute to look at it. I've covered the Kharif reservoir levels. Yes, and so effectively in the RBI, the other slightly negative was that the governor himself has noted during the meeting that the easing cycle is effectively over. So while you're looking for a rate hike cycle, the easing is definitely over. So I think overall, that's not a very comfortable news from a stock market, equity market perspective. So I think that was it. I just want to see whether there's anything else that I missed. No, I think I've covered it. So today was largely a news-related update, but a flattish market. Look forward to my weekly review of what happened, which I'll publish tomorrow, as well as on Monday or Sunday night or Monday, I shall put out the triggers for next week. Thank you.